Support for John Lewis Reflections of a Sit-In Pioneer is made possible by a generous grant from the Arts and Science Council of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. ASC, Culture for All.
We still have bridges to cross before we create the beloved community. We're not there.
The virtues of John Lewis helped shape American values and foster unprecedented change.
Hundreds and thousands of our citizens been willing to be arrested and to go to jail.
Day after day, other cities found themselves in the middle of a 1960 struggle.
It was good that other cities did pick up the very thought that, hey, sit-in will work here and we should do it.
It was fueled primarily by a strong student-driven effort kicked off at historically black colleges.
These were institutional communities, black institutional communities of education, of culture, of politics.
We have to always be looking forward, using the history as a means of helping us to understand it, but also seeing that there are new protests that we need to be engaged in, involved in, so that we're on the right side of history when it's recorded.
50 years ago, I stood right here in this spot, 23 years old, had all of my hair and a few pounds lighter. So I come back here again to say that those days, for the most part, are gone.
For this innovator, the centuries may have changed, but significant sacrifices from 60 years ago remain relevant.
So I said to you, my brothers and sisters, we cannot give up. We cannot give out. We cannot give in. We must get out there and push and pull.
His unmistakable voice added to the American soundtrack of those seeking social justice. Hello and welcome, I'm Steve Crump. Fearless, courageous, and innovative all describe the contributions of John Robert Lewis. His public commitment to equality was first documented as a college student in Nashville, Tennessee, and has gone the distance in his contributing role as an esteemed member of Congress. Like many of his peers and fellow students, Lewis took on and faced the inequality found at 5 and dime store lunch counters by sitting in spaces reserved for whites only. That first came 6 decades ago. His well-known datelines include speaking at the March on Washington, along with enduring and surviving the violence in Selma, Alabama. He first came on the scene in 1960, and during this diamond anniversary of widespread student activism, we share the observations of this civil rights activist in his own words through John Lewis, Reflections of a Sit-In Pioneer. Bold student activism, loudly revered in Greensboro, North Carolina and beyond. That's because some 60 years ago, a fire for righteousness and dignity was ignited here and spread across the South. On February 1st, 1960, 4 North Carolina A&T students, now memorialized and idolized on this campus, bravely created a movement that shaped American history.
On February 1st, 1960, after I sat in for about 5 minutes, you're absolutely right, I was invincible. And I guess probably more important than invincible, I had a sense of dignity, a sense of worth, and a sense of manhood, and to an extent that I had never felt in my life before.
The International Civil Rights Center and Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina is now open.
Franklin McCain, who passed away back in 2014, 4 years after the 50th anniversary acknowledging the nation's lunch counter sit-ins, is often credited as being one of the architects behind the sweeping college movement.
And of course, it was good that other cities did pick up the very thought that, hey, sit-in will work here and we should do it. But we were just astonished about how fast it did spread.
There were a number of things that came before them that urged them on, but also we need to recall that this is only 5 years after Emmett Till, and countless others that had fallen victim to the racial terror.
What started at that lunch counter in Greensboro caught fire at other HBCUs and then began to spread beyond that.
Oh, that was extremely gratifying and surprising as well. To be honest about it and very candid, I don't think we got to the point where we were thinking that, well, when we do this, it's going to be High Point, North Carolina tomorrow, and Danville, Virginia the next day, and Fayetteville the next day, and Winston-Salem the next day. I don't think we thought that way at all.
And when the sit-in started in Greensboro on February the 1st, 1960, that brought joy and happiness to many of us, because we knew that if they could sit down in Greensboro, these 4 young students, then we too can start sitting in and sitting down in an orderly, peaceful, and nonviolent fashion.
The very next week, Nashville was also burning, and Georgia Congressman John Lewis was among the students aggressively fueling the flames of change.
We didn't have a fax machine. We didn't have a website or a cellular telephone. We didn't even have a computer. But we stood on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We used our feet and we put our bodies on the line. We just got in the way. And you must get in the way.
Regardless of location, boldly staying in the way during this taxing exercise for equality required sustained diligence and unrelenting perseverance.
We'd be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served, and someone would come up and spit on us, or put a lighted cigarette out in our hair, or down our backs, pull us off to the lunch counter stool, and people would start beating us. And if you had any young white student sitting with you, they would go toward them and attack them first.
Nashville is known around the world as the home of the Grand Ole Opry for its deep and long-standing ties to country music. But blocks away from the famous Ryman Auditorium, loud demands for full citizenship engaged local student activists including Diane Nash and Reverend James Lawson.
The sit-in spread all across the South like wildfire. I remember the calls to Greensboro. A few days after February the 1st, we had a meeting on Fisk University campus, and more than 500 students met in the chemistry building auditorium, and we decided that we too were going to start sitting in, and we went down town Nashville by the hundreds and started sitting in, and we kept sitting in.
And they were demonstrating that Black Lives Matter by the stand that they took. And they were forcing not only America to come to terms with that, they were forcing the world to come to terms with it.
It was like a snowball. It just kept rolling. And who's next? What city? Atlanta, Jackson, Mississippi, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, Greenville, South Carolina, Rock Hill, South Carolina. And the first mass arrest occurred near the end of February. Became the first mass arrest of students. I got arrested the first time.
Telling headlines served up a black and white scorecard of arrests from city to city. College students weren't the only demonstrators taken to jail for disrupting society's norms, traditions, and customs. But some of the civil rights movement's best-known leaders also demonstrated a strong personal commitment to this collective effort for change.
I remember seeing Dr. King being so moved, so gratified, he was almost moved to tears when people started sitting in. He would say that the marvelous new militancy on the part of the students, these nonviolent soldiers. But he saw the sit-ins with the students and young people as a group that would carry the message, the philosophy of nonviolence to a much larger community.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was among the protesters rounded up by police. His publicized arrest came at a lunch counter inside of Rich's department store in downtown Atlanta.
I think during those days, we were doing what we felt and believed or conceived was the right thing to do. We wanted to desegregate lunch counters and restaurants. We wanted to create an open society, a good society, the beloved community.
Taking groundbreaking steps for legal fairness has been a constant driving force for the student who was attending Nashville's American Baptist College.
I have the pleasure to present to this great audience young John Lewis, National Chairman, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Brother John Lewis.
1963's March on Washington thrust John Lewis into the national spotlight.
Where is our party? Where is the political party that will make it unnecessary to march on Washington? Where is the political party that will make it unnecessary to march in the streets of Birmingham? Where is the political party that will protect the citizen of Albany, Georgia?
His well-documented legacy is deeply cemented in the beating he endured more than a half-century ago in Selma, Alabama, on what's become known as Bloody Sunday during March of 1965. However, 4 years earlier, he endured another racially charged attack in Rock Hill, South Carolina, a community less than 30 miles south of Charlotte. Lewis was part of the Freedom Rides.
I remember in 1961 coming to Rock Hill and getting off a Greyhound bus at the Greyhound bus station to test a decision of the United States Supreme Court banning segregation in places of public transportation. My seatmate, a young white gentleman, the two of us tried to enter this so-called white waiting room, and we started in the doorway, and we were attacked and beaten and left lying in a pool of blood. That was my introduction to Rock Hill. We knew there was a possibility that something could happen on the Freedom Ride or during the movement, but we didn't know where it would happen and how it would happen. But we didn't give up. We didn't give in. We didn't become bitter or hostile. We kept the faith. I think my experience in Rock Hill prepared me for Bloody Sunday. It prepared me for what I faced in Montgomery at the Greyhound bus station there just a few weeks later.
Rock Hill, South Carolina was also responsible for another deeply etched fault line during the sit-in protest. Weeks before Freedom Riders arrived in this community, students from the city's now closed Friendship College courageously pioneered the sit-in movement's concept known as jail no bail. This defiant act required being arrested and enduring harsh punishment at the York County prison camp. Rather than paying the $100 fine issued by the courts, protesters collectively agreed to spend 30 days on a chain gang and let the state pick up the tab for housing and feeding them.
This is truly a historic day in our city and in our country.
In 2015, trespassing charges against the 9 men and supporting members from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were all tossed out.
I say from this point on, I can hold my head up. It's never been down, but a little bit higher. And I think that God is going to let us live a little bit longer just because of it. Enjoy some of the quote-unquote freedom.
Stirring and compelling images of the civil rights icon richly contributed to a moving and very personal memoir titled Walking with the Wind. John Lewis recalls how sit-in demonstrations dramatized the need to eliminate Jim Crow segregation in scores of American cities.
I think during those days, we were doing what we felt and believed or conceived was the right thing to do. We wanted to desegregate lunch counters and restaurants.
This activist, who routinely attracts supportive audiences, has never shied away from sharing the spotlight. His words of respect and admiration haven't changed for fellow lunch counter protesters like Diane Nash more than a half-century later.
But Diane Nash was her own person. She was quite independent, and she was very attractive and very appealing, and she had the ability, the capacity to voice her opinion and get a lot of people to rally around her.
Nash was one of the stalwarts of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, referred to as SNCC. Like other SNCC demonstrators, she passionately subscribed to the philosophy of peaceful protest.
We announced that we are nonviolent and unarmed, wouldn't strike back even if attacked.
And she was our local leader during the early days of the movement in Nashville. But later she started working all across the South.
During the demonstrations in Rock Hill, her letter to the editor of the local paper was published while she was in jail with the Friendship Nine. Nash publicly questioned the laws of segregation.
I always took time to write long letters home, explaining why I was doing what I was doing and how important it was and what was happening to me, and that I was all right, and that I was a lot better by having taken the action than I would be if I just tolerated being oppressed like that.
Applause from Lewis also came to individuals like Charles Jones, who led the sit-in movement from Charlotte's Johnson C. Smith University.
I would never forget Charles Jones. This young man, bright, committed, dedicated. He was very articulate, good spokesperson.
Here we were with the highest human spirit saying, come, let us all sit and reason together. Let us change this through love.
I remember meeting him in the early part of 1960 during those first SNCC meetings, where SNCC was organized. And he was a preacher at heart.
From my belief system, the elders and the gods were protecting us. And you explain that, but I know that to be true.
Stopping society's posted rules touched off these protests at our nation's lunch counter. That was one task. And the endgame goal was rooted in removing common legal barriers of discrimination based on race. These days, stark, haunting signs are regarded as relics of the past. Riveting messages from a bygone era are the truthful reminders of a blatant, decisive, painful, and troubling reality.
Those signs that we saw in Greensboro, in Rock Hill, in Nashville, and all across the American South, they're gone, and they will not return. The only place our young people will see those signs will be in a book, in a museum, on a video. But we must admit and recognize the fact that there's some invisible signs, some invisible scars and stains that tell us and remind us over and over again that we still have a great distance to go.
Pioneering protest, initiated at the Greensboro Wharves and shocked much of the South, went on for more than 5 months before change arrived during July of 1960. That's when lunch counters in North Carolina's so-called Gate City removed its limited barriers based on the color of one's skin.
How ridiculous can you be? What the hell was all the fuss about? I mean, why was that such a big deal?
Another big deal unfolded in Nashville some 2 months earlier. Eating establishments across Tennessee's largest city were integrated and open to all by May of 1960. Laws dictating segregation in many communities were changed before LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
You must have faith in the possibility and the capacity of your fellow human being to grow and to change.
They're pioneers to us, and as pioneers, they showed us that it was possible for us not only to get an education, but to stand up for justice and to be concerned about what was going on in our broader community than just being concerned about getting grades.
While such a rich inheritance is widely embraced by graduates of historically black colleges and universities, individuals who lived through this experience will never shake the memories.
Here we were going downtown and had to go in the back of a store, stand up, be served only when folks got around to you, with no dignity or respect at all. So underneath was this desire to find a handle to attack it and to change it. We couldn't do it with guns. That was not a part of our nature.
Despite now jarring images of discrimination from past decades, bold printed flashbacks, and touchable tributes to these trailblazers at places like the Smithsonian, valid questions remain regarding what our society has learned from the sacrifices of young adults.
60 years is a long time, and over that 60-year period, America's made great progress in some areas, but we're still struggling with issues of race and reconciliation.
And while we have made significant number of changes, there are some things that have not changed.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
President Barack Obama echoed the work and challenges that lie ahead as he paid tribute to the 9 people who lost their lives at Charleston's Mother Emanuel AME Church, all shot to death by convicted killer Dylan Roof. The slain victims, including the congregation's leader, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, are remembered for their ultimate sacrifices connected to social justice. In the audience that day was John Lewis, who feels more must be done to foster collective inclusion. While the journey of equality has its early beginnings by being jailed in Nashville during February of 1960, his long reach has gone the distance in both the 20th and 21st century. Arguably and understandably, the Georgia congressman says there are still many more miles to go.
We're not there yet. We have not yet created the beloved community. The promised land is not here yet. We got to continue to work, continue to struggle, continue to do what we can as a nation and as a people to build the beloved community, to build a truly interracial democracy.
Life's sunset years for the Georgia congressman rarely found him slowing down. Book projects, along with speeches on the road, coming during a journey towards equality that began by first grabbing a seat at a 5 and dime store lunch counter. He now faces a new challenge. In late 2019 came word that Lewis was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. In a statement, the congressman said, "I've been in some kind of fight for freedom, equality, basic human rights for nearly my entire life. I have never faced a fight quite like the one I have now. It is clearly a very private and personal fight for an individual who has left a remarkable and stellar legacy through decades of meaningful public battles." That's John Lewis, Reflections of a Sitting Pioneer. I'm Steve Crump. Thanks so much for joining us.
more about the role John Lewis played in the American Civil Rights Movement, please visit the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian, which houses exhibits connected to the student protest. Additional information can be found at Atlanta's National Center for Civil and Human Rights. The words of John Lewis can be found in his book titled Walking with the Wind. His reflections are written in Across That Bridge, Life Lessons and a Vision for Change. And another valuable resource is discovered in the illustrated trilogy titled March. All are available through leading bookstores and Amazon.com. You've been watching John Lewis Reflections of a Sit-In Pioneer. Support for John Lewis Reflections of a Sit-In Pioneer is made possible by a generous grant from the Arts and Science Council of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, ASC, Culture for All.